On behalf of the Human Rights Coalition, we also want to highlight that Commissioner Hogue found disinformation and misinformation is an existential threat to our nation's democracy. This is an incredibly serious issue that has deeply impacted each of our communities. But I would just like to highlight that the Falun Gong and the Tigrayan communities, for example, have faced multiple compounding ramifications, including a direct diminishment in their ability to participate in civic discourse due to misinformation and disinformation. And Canada should urgently work to protect these communities. Falun Gong activists have evidence from the highest level of the CCP government that there is a directive to use misinformation and disinformation to attack Falun Gong activists. In Tigray, there was a horrific genocide that led to the death of somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people in 2 years. Hundreds of thousands of women were raped, and atrocities and the targeting of civilians continue to this day. And hardly anyone knows about it, partly because of a concerted and organized mis- and disinformation campaign. We also call for justice and accountability for mass human rights violations for the Tigrayan community, the Tamil community, and others like them. The Tamil community, who also experienced a genocide, has drawn a direct line between the ongoing impunity of the Sri Lankan government and the government's emboldened acts of transnational repression against them. We see the impact of decades of unchecked oppression in the Eritrean community, how so many Eritrean voices are viciously silenced, how the dictator in Asmara continues to impose a 2% diaspora tax on Eritrean refugees in Canada. And as a coalition, we call for the misuse of charitable funds and proxy organizations to intimidate and harass the Eritrean community to be investigated. And finally, let me just say how vitally important we think that it is that any steps in Canada that Canada takes to address transnational repression be transparent, and that discussions include all of the impacted communities. There's a real lack of transparency, for example, in the sanctions process in Canada. Currently, there is no procedure to address a request for the imposition of a sanction. There is no obligation on the government to consider a request. And if the government does consider a sanction request and decides to deny it, there's no obligation to inform the person or the organization requesting the sanctions that their request is actually being rejected. So it takes a great deal of organization and resources to submit a sanctions request in the first place, so we should keep that in mind. And we need collective action. Just as authoritarian regimes around the world are learning repressive tactics from one another and cooperating to carry out global campaigns to silence critics, we too need more collaboration, information sharing, and sharing of best practices when we talk about transnational repression. And we really must be careful not to exclude any of the groups that are directly affected.